Okay, everybody. I'm coming back to you now to give you that sixth mind walk I was talking about, materialism, idealism, and overview. First, just to kind of do a general reminder of what happened in the last mind walk, I talked mostly about reductionism and generalizations as analytical. So the analytical tool of reduction, which is to set aside what's unnecessary for any object or phenomenon to be experienced, and generalization, which is an analytical tool by which we create categories and find general trends that we can follow. So reduction and generalization both have their own uh, very important part to play in doing any kind of thoughtful analysis of events and experiences. However, it is also the case that reduction can be taken to an extreme, and in that extreme, it's called reductionism, and that reduces all experience to one kind of thing or one kind of process. All right. So an example I'd like to use, it's an example that a lot of philosophers have used over the years. That I find that it's pretty good one. Let's say that you have a cup, and let's say the cup is made of plastic. The color of the cup is yellow. The size of the cup is 32 ounce. It's a cup, so it's been made for liquid matter, right? For liquids. We could say that to hold liquids. Okay. Let's see, what else could we say about it? Oh, not only is it 32 ounces, not only does it hold 32 ounces of liquids, it is also, I don't know, let's say 7 inches high and has a circumference of 7 inches. Why not? 7 inch circumference. So now we said about as much as we can say. One more thing. Let's say that when you look at it, it has rings of ridges going from bottom to top to make for easier grip. All right. Now, here's the thing. The cup, right, made of plastic, it looks yellow, can hold 32 ounces of liquids. It's 7 inches high, has a 7 inch circumference, rings of ridges going from the bottom to the top to make for easier grip. Okay. Right. Now, the issue here, of course, is to get to what's actually necessary for the cup to be a cup. And that's really what reduction is. Reduction is understanding what you would absolutely have to have in order for the cup to even appear as this thing, to even work, right? Well, that being the case, let's kind of take a look at this. The cup has to be made of something because it's going to hold something that itself is material, right? So it has to have some kind of material it's made out of. But if you've reached the age of 18 and you have not experienced an entire array of cups, let me just list really quickly. There are plastic cups, glass cups, ceramic cups, wood cups, like any kind of matter, including paper, if it's done correctly, can be turned into a cup that holds liquid, right? So the matter, it has to be material. It has to be made of matter, right? So first thing I do is I get rid of some of these other things. It has to be made of matter. Does that matter have to be yellow? No, it does not have to be yellow. Okay. Does it have to actually be the size that it is? Well, it's not necessary for every cup to be 32 ounces. It's also the case that not every cup will actually be used to hold a container. I have a number of cups around the house that I've used to hold, to hold liquids. I have a number of cups around the house that I use to hold some soil and I use them to start plants, to begin getting them to blossom, to root, so that I can do something with them, maybe take them out to the garden. I use them to hold, sometimes I use them to hold quarters. I have like one cup here that's a 32-ounce cup that's filled with quarters and dimes and nickels. I use, right, in every one of these cups, you also know this much, all cups are not the same size, right? So you can have a cup that's 32 ounces, 7 inches high, 7 inches circumference, but you can also, so in other words, the basic issue here is that not only does a cup not have to be yellow, it doesn't actually have to be the size that we're talking about at the moment, nor does it have to, have all these particular measurements, nor does it even have to hold particular liquids it might have been made to originally hold, like a coffee cup. Coffee cup, lots of coffee cups I have in the house are holding little odds and ends. So again, just kind of getting to this other point, and the tactility of it, how it feels, they can be smooth, they can be rough, they can be ridged, they can be, I'm just really kind of belaboring this because I really want to get to the point that the majority of things that a cup can be made of, made for, how it appears, how it feels, how useful it is, what you can put in it, it just literally is not needing to be all those things. Really, all the cup needs, right? Let me change this part here. It doesn't have to be plastic, but it has to be matter because it's going to hold matter, right? It doesn't have to be a particular shape, but it does have to be a shape, right? So in other words, whatever particular shape it has, that means, whatever the particular shape it has, that means that, it just needs to be shapely. This is an Aristotelian realization, a realization of Aristotle, possibly one of Plato, that matter never appears without shape. Okay, so matter has to be shaped, and once you've shaped matter, so another thing you could say here is, with this notion of reducing away what's not necessary, is size. It has to have a size. Because it has a shape, it'll have a size, but the sizes can all be varying. And if you wanted to say texture, because it's actually a material object, it will always have a texture. So what you get here is a really nice, if you think about it, generalizations. Once you've reduced away what's not absolutely necessary for a thing to be, what you're left with is what's necessary for that thing to be, right? And here, all of these are different sort of measurable or testable or predictable generalizations, right? Now, as I said before, and in the last thing, generalizations can be very useful. And I just sort of showed you how reduction can lead you to seeing general patterns, general shapes, general uses, etc. So generalizations are necessary as a logical tool to allow us to do deductive and inductive reasoning, so that we can, move toward generalization or move away from generalization. All right, now, the issue we get here, if reductionism is a kind of vicious pattern where you reduce something down to matter, right? So we say this, to reduce all experience to one kind of thing or process. Generalization as a logical or as an analytical tool is basically about making certain claims. And the problem with bad generalizations or dangerous generalizations is you make a general claim, usually fallacious or biased, about something or some group, right? And so I talked the other day about hasty generalizations, that if you have one, conclusions are drawn about an individual or group based on a poverty of information. That means you're not very well informed, but you make huge sweeping generalizations quickly, hastily. And the other kind of sort of dangerous generalization is the biased generalization, or what we call stereotyping, where some supposed general trait is shared among members of a group, and that's what kind of points them out. So anti-Semitism, racism, diverse kinds of biases towards different kinds of people, sexual orientations, male and female, trans, cisgender, transgender, you know, all of these kind of things can be stereotyped, right? And, you know, a lot of what goes on in political debate has to do with having made having a reductionistic view of human nature, reduces all human nature to being badness or evil, and then having all of the, you know, having generalizations you use that demonstrate the evil of different groups, possibly not the evil of the group you belong to, but certainly the stereotypes of all the other kinds of groups. Okay, so that's reductionism and generalization. You see from this, from the very idea of what we did when we were reducing the cup to its vectors or its structures that are necessary for a cup to be, if you will, a container, okay? And that gave us actually productive generalizations that we could use to talk about, in a sense, all material containers, okay? Now, two reductionisms that are quite vicious and often lead to generalizations about the structure of the world, and sometimes lead to biased stereotyping about some people in the world, are materialism and idealism. So we'll start with materialism. Materialism is the reduction of all things or processes to a fundamental or general material that everyone agrees on, or that the thinker believes to be the reason, right? What I want to do first here is I want to move this up here, actually. All right, so in the ancient world, among the ancients, there was elementalism, okay? Now, at first, it might be the case that everybody believed every kind of thing was just a separate thing, and there wasn't a major material structure. But I think actually that's not true. You look at Plato, Aristotle, who are following the works of people like Empedocles, who was a thinker that posited that everything is made of four basic elements. Right? There are four basic elements everything else is made of. Empedocles talks about this idea is picked up. It's sort of the advanced idea, natural philosophic or natural science idea of the time. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle do not seem to certainly Aristotle agrees with it. Earth, air, fire, and water are the main elements, and they make up the world. And everything is made up of some combination of earth, air, fire, and water. Some things that are particularly heavy are made up of a lot of earth. Things that are particularly light are made up of a lot of air. Things that are particularly hot are made up of fire, a lot of fire. Things that are particularly wet or liquidy are made up of a lot of water. But what you find is that it's very rare that you get a pure earth, a pure air, a pure fire, and a pure water, the purity of these elements, because everything in the world seems to all be mixed together. And of course, this is also part of the Aristotelian theory that the reason things fall is in direct proportion to how much earth they have in them, right? So a hot air balloon literally uses air to lift itself off of the ground. Even though everything in it is made of earth, there's enough air coming from the production of the fire that the air and fire together creates something that actually floats up into the air. But if that was not there, those things are mostly made out of quote unquote earth, things brought up from the earth. And so therefore they'll have a tendency to fall back down really quickly. So anything that's really heavy tends to want to get, it's got a lot of earth in it, tends to want to get back to the earth. Okay. All right. So materialism, again, reduction of all things to processes to fundamental general material. Now, also in the ancient period came along the thinking of two people, Leucippus and Democritus, Democritus being the more famous. And then in the Latin world, there was a fellow named Lucretius who picked up Leucippus and Democritus's idea of the atom. And here, atomism is the reduction of everything down to atoms. Everything is atoms bumping around in the void. The ancients, the atom was literally the smallest project, the smallest particle, the smallest material. Nothing else is below the atom. And atom actually is the Greek word for undivided or indivisible. Okay. This is still held in many ways by modern philosophers and modern scientists up through the 19th century, when we get into what we would think more along our contemporary period of history, which is actually anything after 1815. And contemporary history, contemporary events and thinking, atoms are seen more as collectives of particles and processes. So the atom's actually, the atom, which it literally means undividable, is actually divisible into three particles: electrons, neutrons, and protons. And then there are also these quantum particles that those are made of. So you can go down a little farther. The deal is that you just can keep going down. Then we get some anomalies looking at quantum mechanics and quantum material and quanta. And so therefore we come up with this idea of string theory. And it just keeps going and going and going. You literally can't get to the bottom, right? And it also becomes harder and harder as you get to that level to be able to test for what you're talking about, right? So, all right, materialism is the reduction of all things or processes to a fundamental general material. Originally, we had the idea that there was these four elements, which all in different combinations make up the world around us, and everything is reduced to that, including the soul and the spirit. And the same thing with this atomism. Everything is atoms bumping around in the void, including the soul or the spirit. Originally, the atom was you couldn't go any farther than the atom, but our own scientific investigations have demonstrated the atom is actually made up of a lot of other things, and how we understand the atom is really a lot more complicated than we really probably would like. The issue here is that if you simply say the world is made of atoms, and you don't know what, do you have an ancient idea of atoms, or do you have a contemporary idea of atoms? Do you understand how the contemporary sciences, physical sciences, are themselves in a weird place because of the commitment to materialism in science? And they're having a hard time getting to that ultimate matter so that they could say this is what the world's made out of. So, are you a materialist? And this to me is a really interesting problematic, and I've brought it up in other places. A lot of people who don't believe in evolution don't question that the world is made of atoms. But nobody really has ever experienced an atom. And if you actually know what it is scientists and engineers are actually up to when they're manipulating quantum reality, it's about manipulating probabilities, not about manipulating hard matter. Okay, so maybe that went over some people's heads, but there might be a few of you out there who get what's going on. So let me go to this sort of more contemporary definition of materialism that you find. I think this is from the American Heritage Dictionary, just to give it a kind of common, the theory that physical matter is the only reality, and that everything, including thought, feeling, mind, and will, can be explained in terms of matter and physical phenomenon. Okay, that's a good definition as far as philosophical definition. Obviously, in our society, materialism and being materialistic can also be a sort of sociocultural way of thinking, where you believe that the only way to show your success is through the materials that is through certain material manifestations of your success, money, big houses, blah, blah, blah. But that's a different kind of materialism. Materialism we're talking about right now is the theory that physical matter is the only reality, and that everything, including thought, feeling, mind, and will, can be explained in terms of matter and physical phenomena. Now, this is where what I want to add, because I think all this stuff's being talked about more than adequately in your textbook, what I want to add to it as someone who's been thinking about this stuff for almost 40 years is, I want to kind of like point out in the beginning when people were starting to differentiate more in the world, and they were coming up with words that somehow help them describe and explain what they were experiencing. A lot of these words a lot of the words we use today still hold in them, this historical pattern, and we can reach back into that and we can get some clues about, these notions, right? So what is matter originally? What is matter in a sense philologically for the people who first put forward this terminology? And I think this is really kind of fascinating, and that both matter and idea as a pattern are mutually related in this way. Material comes from Latin materialis, which comes from Latin mater, which is mater, which is the obviously Latin word for mother. Matron is another word in English that we get from mater. So, someone who's married and has children, a matron. Mater, mother. And this actually derives from the Proto-Indo-European word ma for breast. So in one sense, in the old days, what they would do is they would talk about the matter of a tree. What is a tree made out of? Well, a tree's made out of wood, right? Okay, so let's go. Tree is wood. That's its matter. But now think about really what they would have been talking about when they said that. The tree is wood, but they actually would be talking about the trunk of the tree, which is the mother of the tree. Okay, and from there she spreads out her roots and her branches. And she drops her seeds from the flowers. So all of this, so it's the main body of the tree, which is the matter of it. This is the original way that these words were utilized. Okay, and it's a very interesting thing that if we actually go over to Greek, the word for matter, hula, alternative Spanish, so you actually kind of understand that Y has an U sound, is hula. Okay, and this is actually the Greek word for materialis, Latin materialis, or matter, and it literally means wood. A lot of the words that we associate with matter have to do with, in one sense, the first material that human beings mastered. And the first material that human beings mastered actually was wood. We talk about the Stone Age when we made stone tools, because stone tools survive. Whereas and it's usually just the heads of the stone tools, right? Wood, which is probably our first material that we make use of, wood will, over the course of history, unless it petrifies, that is, becomes rock-like, wood will dissipate. Wood will go back to the earth, if you will, in a kind of old sense of the word, right? It won't last 5,000 years in most conditions. So it's a very kind of interesting thing. So it's, even though our earliest tools we have are mostly stone, our material we first worked with was wood. I think that's just really kind of fascinating. And wood, in this sense, then in the English language, following Latin, with this materialis, it goes to the part of the tree that you actually use to build with, right? It's not that you won't build things with the branches, because it depends on the growth of the tree, but you know, all the big planks are going to come from the mother, right? From the central trunk. That's where you're going to get most of the really great wood you can use to build with. Okay. So, all right. So there's that thinking. Now let's talk about idealism. Idealism is the reduction of all things or processes to the fundamental general ideas of the mind. And basically what that means is it's the theory that the object of external perception in itself or as perceived consists of ideas. This is actually kind of, you know, one of the things that you're working with Bishop Berkeley is kind of along these ideas, right? So he's one of the people who's an idealist, even though he's an empiricist. It's pronounced Berkeley. Bishop Berkeley is concerned with this idea. Pardon me, the pun, I guess. He's concerned with the fact that matter itself is an idea. It's a concept. And that's actually in one sense shown here, because it becomes a generalized concept, right, based on it originally meaning the first kind of material we use to build with, work with, and make and change the world with. Then slowly but surely, over the course of centuries, it becomes the word for all things that apparently physically endure and allow us to manipulate them and use them for building and what have you, right? Yet at the same time, you see this matter is an idea. It's a concept, right? Everything we're doing, and once taking this into account, is that the world, whatever it may be, must be interpreted through the mind. Okay? And this is really what's meant by idealism. Now, again, there's another word in English, just like materialism has come to mean success in society, you know, or materialistic person is somebody who only cares about, you know, getting their Skrilla, that's it, you know, and give me mine and I don't care about you. The idealism has come to mean, you know, somebody with high ideals that they believe should be followed. And an idealist is then somebody who does that, and they try to kind of get other people to, you know, think in these idealistic terms about the benefit of humanity, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's not a very good use of the word idealism. And the only reason I say that is because really what you're talking about there is, right, not idealism, do-goodering, whatever, right? That's called, a real better word for that is altruism, which means you think of others, usually before you think of yourself. There are a lot of people, especially who want to call left-wing people idealists. In some instances, I could kind of see that because they're actually trying to put forward a new idea about the world that's different from capitalism, which is very materialistic in the sense, in both the senses of the word, right? But they're not, while they're working with these kind of ideas, they're actually being more altruistic than idealistic, right? They're thinking about how everyone besides themselves will also be affected by the things they do and the things that are going on. So, rethink how you think of these two terms, materialism and idealism, when they're applied to social success and social action. All right, so in getting back to how they're used in philosophy, again, idealism is the theory that objects of external perception in itself or as perceived consists of ideas. Bishop Berkeley goes through a lot of trouble to demonstrate that matter is an idea or a concept. And actually how this word, which is a Greek word, is in a sense sort of in combination with matter or material. It's the Greek word, the word idea comes from Greek idea, which is a variation of the Greek eidos, which is the word for pattern. So if we were to try to do something where like, okay, so materialism versus idealism, right? If we were going to try to make that if we were going to try to make that more consistent linguistically, materialism is derived from a Latin word, idealism is derived from a Greek word. What we could either go materialism patternism, or we could go holism idealism. That's actually the would be the more precise way to do it, but you know that English is a hodgepodge of different languages, and once something kind of gets a foot in the door, it sort of stays there and it doesn't get changed. But now getting back to this word idea in Greek, it comes from the Greek word idea, which comes from the Greek word eidos, which means a pattern. And actually the eidos is the pattern. The pattern is what makes something seeable, what makes something visible, right? And so this derives from the Proto-Indo-European word vide, which means to see, which is also related to wisdom, vision, you know, a host of other kinds of terms. So if we do just take this Latin term pattern, paternus, Latin paternus, which derives from Latin pater, which means father. So, you know, what I like about materialism patternism, if we use these terms, is that you see very quickly that at least for Romans, at least for people who spoke the Latin language, talking about materialism and idealism, or talking about matter and ideas, was talking about the mother, the physical body, and the pattern, the mental shape, right? And this then is actually already shows a certain kind of dichotomy between the masculine and the feminine in the Latin language, okay? So pater, father, and that comes from Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European. I'm sorry, this one's one that I let get away from me. Let's see here. All right, I'm sorry, I haven't looked this up. It just kind of flew right out of my head. Oh, yeah, okay. That's what I was thinking, but I didn't want to make a mistake. So the Proto-Indo-European hasn't changed very much. It's also pater. And so all the words for father and all the words for mother are really very related to each other. So in one sense, then, if you see the matter and the pattern, right, the material and the pattern have to be brought together. So the mother provides the body and the father provides the pattern. I'm not saying that's actually the way the world is, but it's interesting that these two basic reductionisms, that the world is either only material, physical reality, and it's only made up, including the soul, is nothing but matter, and the concept that it's all ideas and it's all about the interpretation that running through the mind. You're still looking at this very interesting sort of, I'd want to say almost yin yang, or mother father dyad. All right, I'm going to stop it here. This just, again, was to supplement and let y'all kind of see a few things that you wouldn't have seen because of some of the stuff written in the book. Pay close attention to the readings. Don't forget to go over your quick reviews, and make the most of these things. Use all of the tools at your availability, and that way you'll do better on your quizzes and you'll do well on your essay. Okay? All right. Talk to y'all a little later.